much as the whole of Canada. What is Canada in the 18th century? It's a vast frozen waste. It's nothing but snow and beavers. In money terms, there's simply no contest. Guadeloupe wins hands down.
The war had its own rhythm based on the seasons. And the campaigning seasons in the West Indies tended to be complementary to those in North America. During the summer, which was the prime campaigning season in North America, was the hurricane season of the West Indies. In winter, when it was difficult to fight in North America, was the prime campaigning season in the West Indies. So fleets and armies shuttled back and forth between North America and the West Indies, depending on the seasons.
For 4 years after D'Estaing sailed to New York, the British and French fought over the islands of the West Indies, so rich in commodities those countries treasured. Some of the islands were captured, lost, and recaptured by the warring nations. Tens of thousands of European soldiers swarmed over rich and strategically important islands. Spain joined the war in 1779 on the side of America and France. And at the end of 1780, Britain declared war on the Netherlands to stem that country's flow of arms and supplies to America through the Dutch island of St. Eustatius.
In the early stages of the rebellion, the Dutch were the suppliers of gunpowder and guns and munitions, and they were supplied via some of the Dutch West Indies, above all the island of St. Eustatius. And so long as the Dutch were neutral, it was very difficult for the British to stop them. The only certain way of stopping the Dutch shipping supplies to the rebels would have been to declare war on the Dutch and make them enemies. And in the end, in fact, that was what the British did.
It would be the combined naval strength of the French, the Spanish, and the Dutch that would finally overcome Britain's naval superiority.
The American problem has, from this point on, has receded to the background. From the point of view of the British government, and even more from the point of view of the French and Spaniards, this is a real serious war against first-class enemies. And what happens in the colonies on the other side of the Atlantic is a subsidiary issue.
The goals of empire and the war spread far beyond America and the West Indies. In fact, the European powers continued to do battle over colonial prizes for 2 years after the fighting had ended in America. And the final shots of the war that had begun at Concord and Lexington were fired near Cuddalore, off the coast of southern India, in a battle that guaranteed Britain control of India in the 19th century. After France had entered the war in 1778, George III's minister responsible for the war in America, George Germain, searched for a new way to subdue the rebel states.
Clearly, the attempt to do it by crushing New England hadn't worked. Now, Lord George concluded that what you needed was to reoccupy quite systematically, starting in the south, and moving north, and as you went, consolidate the gains by organizing and arming loyalist militias.
The South was attractive to the British for other reasons as well. In order to effectively wage war in and control the West Indies, they felt they needed naval bases in the southern colonies. They decided to take Charleston, South Carolina, the 4th largest city in America. This decision would lead the British to one of their greatest victories, and finally to Yorktown, and their greatest defeat. The first step in the British plan to subdue the South and gain Charleston involved the taking of the smaller port city of Savannah, Georgia. They accomplished that goal nearly effortlessly on December 29, 1778. But in September, the Comte d'Estaing with 4,000 French troops landed near Savannah to join a much smaller American force under Massachusetts General Benjamin Lincoln in an attempt to regain the city. The French commander treated Lincoln as an inferior. Their Allied siege was a disaster, resulting in over 1,200 casualties. D'Estaing would return to the West Indies. The rebels would head to Charleston.
To Charleston with fear the rebels repair. D'Estaing scampers back to his boats, sir, each blaming the other, each cursing his brother, and may they cut each other's throats, sir. A Loyalist Ballad, 1779.
D'Estaing's departure opened the door for Clinton. At the end of 1779, he sailed from New York for Charleston. By the end of April 1780, he had the entire Southern Army trapped there and bombarded them at will.
Fatigue was so great that for want of sleep, many faces were so swelled they could scarcely see out of their eyes. General William Moultrie.
But the rebels would not submit. On May 11th, negotiations between Lincoln and Clinton broke down, and both sides began a furious shelling.
It was a glorious sight to see them like meteors crossing each other and bursting in the air. It appeared as if the stars were tumbling down, great guns bursting, and wounded men groaning along the lines. It was a dreadful night. It was our last great effort, but it availed us nothing. General William Moultrie.
It was the largest rebel surrender of the war, the 2,500-man Southern Army and 800 militia.
The Charleston expedition was originally mounted as part of a global strategy which was all directed against the French and Spaniards and was looking at the West Indies. But it was so successful that it persuaded the cabinet, British cabinet, to put a big army there. And I think this was a mistake. I think Cornwallis's troops might have been employed in a decisive theatre, the West Indies say, instead of which they set off gallivanting around the back country of the Carolinas, doing no particular good to the British cause, and in the end getting themselves into disastrous trouble.
For the next year, the British just ran through the South. They lost a little battle here or there, but by and large, they were winning the war because they had the most fearsome cavalry officer of the war on their side. His name was Banastre Tarleton. And this man had an outfit called the British Legion, about 400 men, half on horseback, half on foot. And when he wanted to get his foot soldiers someplace in a hurry, they'd ride 2 men to a horse. And Tarleton would tear across the state. Just amazing, the amount of ground he could cover.
Tarleton wanted a victory at any cost. So he was a fearsome officer to his enemy. You knew if you faced Tarleton, you faced one of the toughest fighters of the British Army.
Banastre Tarleton, the Green Dragoon, secured his fame forever when he and his British and Loyalist Legion came upon an American party in the North Carolina area known as the Waxhaws. He ignored their attempt to surrender and butchered them with saber and bayonet.
Not a man was spared. For 15 minutes after every man was prostrate, they went over the ground, plunging their bayonets into everyone that exhibited any signs of life. And in some instances where several had fallen one over the other, these monsters were seen to throw off on the point of the bayonet the uppermost, to come at those beneath. Dr. Robert Brownfield, a surgeon at the Waxhaws,